So for History 101, I had to answer a question which was analyze the extent to which Dred Scott versus Sanford and the Bleeding Kansas led to the dissolution of the Union. So what was the dissolution of the Union? Well, before the Civil War began, there was a fine line, the North and the South. In the North, there was no slavery. They didn't want slavery. They didn't believe in slavery. They believed that black people had the same rights as white people. In the South, it was completely opposite. They needed slavery. They wanted slavery. They saw it as black people had no rights and that they needed to work. So one of my examples that led to the dissolution of the Union was the Bleeding Kansas. Now, what was the Bleeding Kansas? Well, it was initially an argument if Kansas would become a slave state or a free state. Now, this led to a political confrontation which even resulted in physical violence between the pro-slavery party, which was in the South, and the anti-slavery party, which is in the North. Both of these parties clashed in with each other and fought over if Kansas would join either the South or the North. Now, the North wanted Kansas to join them because they didn't want slavery to spread anymore. And the South wanted Kansas to join them because they didn't want anti-slavery to spread anymore. Now, this resulted in physical violence, like I said before, and really, this was a civil war even 5 years before the actual Civil War even began. And that's because 56 people were killed in the Bleeding Kansas. 56 Americans. 56 people in which before we fought for our independence against Great Britain. And now we're fighting with each other because over slavery. We're fighting with each other and we're trying to get what we want in order to show who has the highest power. Now, this resulted in, yes, 56 people died, and also the Nebraska Act of 1854. And the Nebraska Act of 1854 was an attempt at union again, and this stated that states had the choice in which either they would become a free state or a slave state, based on the votes of the people inside that state. So as I said, this is a complete example of dissolution of the Union because of the fact that people were fighting with each other politically and physically in Kansas over slavery. Now, another example of the dissolution of the Union was the Dred Scott versus Sanford. Now, this was a case in which Dred Scott, a slave, fought for his American rights and wanted to become an American citizen. Now, he was a slave in the South, and in the South, they have it to where a Negro who has ancestors that were slaves cannot have the same rights as people who didn't have Negroes in their ancestry, or slaves in their ancestry. Meaning that if I was an African American and my great-great-grandfather, he was a slave before me, that means that technically I'm still a slave and that I can't get my rights. So Dred Scott had his owners take him to the North or the Free States, and there he fought for his rights. Now he attempted to sue for his freedom. In the 7-2 decision, Congress ruled that his right for suing them would be taken. And also this resulted in the Supreme Court taking away all rights to African Americans. Now, this was a complete dissolution of the Union because that law that the Supreme Court made was completely unconstitutional. They can't take away rights of black people, but they did. And this benefited the South because that means that they could do whatever they wanted to their slaves. And this made the North very angry because that means that they're losing their right to fight for anti-slavery. And this then will carry on to fighting to the Civil War, where they will fight for if slavery should be kept or abolished. This is one of the big examples because Dred Scott, who was a former slave, fought for his independence, but he lost. And that's because people still didn't like people that were in the Supreme Court or in the Congress didn't like, where some of them were pro-slavery, meaning they wanted slaves. And this didn't work out for him in the end. Thank you for listening, and this concludes my POL presentation of learning for History 101.